"Sir, we need you to come with us." The words echoed across the polished marble lobby, just as the morning sun poured through the towering glass windows of Whitmore Tech headquarters, and in that single moment Marcus Reed felt the entire building turn toward him. Conversation stopped. Keyboards fell silent. Even the quiet hum of the espresso machine near the reception desk seemed to fade into the background. Marcus stood frozen beside his janitor card, a pair of blue cleaning gloves still in his hand, trying to understand why two uniformed officers were standing only a few feet away from him, while dozens of employees watched from their desks and hallways. Just 12 hours earlier, he had been mopping the same floors after the company's annual celebration, a long night of music, laughter, and executives drinking expensive champagne under crystal lights. Marcus hadn't been part of the party, of course. People like him rarely were. He worked the night shift, cleaning offices most employees never noticed, making sure the building looked perfect every morning before the executives arrived. That was his routine. Quiet work. Honest work. The kind of work he took pride in because it kept a roof over his daughter Lily's head and groceries in their small apartment fridge across town. Marcus was a single father, 36 years old, raising a 7-year-old girl who believed her dad could fix anything in the world. Every night before school, she would ask him the same question while tying her sneakers by the door. "Did you help anyone today, Dad?" And Marcus always tried to answer yes. Last night had been no different, at least at first. After the party ended and the last guests left, Marcus had started his usual routine, wiping down tables and emptying trash bins scattered around the executive lounge on the 32nd floor. That was when he saw her, Claire Whitmore, the CEO herself, one of the most powerful women in the city. She was sitting alone near the private elevator corridor, her posture unsteady, clearly exhausted after the long evening. Most employees avoided Claire Whitmore. She had a reputation for precision, discipline, and a level of focus that intimidated nearly everyone who worked for her. But Marcus had seen something else in that moment, someone who simply needed help getting home safely. So he made a decision. A simple one. The kind of decision a father would hope someone might make for his own daughter someday. He helped her into the passenger seat of her car, drove carefully across town to the quiet neighborhood where her house overlooked the river, and made sure she was resting safely on the living room couch before leaving. He didn't touch anything else. Didn't take anything. Didn't even step farther into the house than necessary. On the coffee table, he left a small handwritten note on a scrap of paper from his janitor notebook. "You were safe, Marcus." Then he locked the door behind him and walked back to the bus stop under the cool midnight air, believing the night had ended like any other. But now, standing in the bright lobby surrounded by co-workers and strangers, Marcus watched as the taller officer spoke again in a calm voice. "Mr. Reed, you're being asked to come with us regarding a report filed this morning." Across the lobby, the elevator doors opened quietly, and Claire Whitmore stepped out, her expression unreadable as she looked directly at Marcus. And in that moment, he realized something had gone terribly wrong. Marcus Reed had always believed that a man was measured by the small choices no one else noticed. Long before the bright marble floors of Whitmore Tech or the quiet bus rides home after midnight shifts, his life had been built around one simple rule: do the right thing even when nobody is watching. He learned that lesson years earlier in a small brick house on the south side of Chicago where he grew up with his mother and younger sister. His mother worked 2 jobs at a neighborhood clinic, often leaving before sunrise and returning well after dark. But no matter how tired she was, she always made time to sit with Marcus at the kitchen table and remind him that character mattered more than money or status. Marcus carried those words with him through every chapter of his life. In his 20s, he had worked as a firefighter, waking up at all hours to respond to alarms across the city, running toward emergencies while others ran away. It was difficult work, but Marcus loved the sense of purpose it gave him. That was also where he met his wife, Danielle, a pediatric nurse with a warm laugh and a way of making every room feel lighter the moment she stepped into it. Together they built a quiet life filled with ordinary joys: Sunday morning pancakes, evening walks through the neighborhood park, and plans for a future that seemed wide open. Then, 5 years ago, everything changed. Danielle became seriously ill and passed away within a year, leaving Marcus alone with their newborn daughter Lily and a life that suddenly felt uncertain. Marcus left the fire department soon after because the unpredictable hours made it impossible to raise a young child alone. The transition was difficult. Money became tight. The apartment became smaller. But Marcus never allowed bitterness to take root. Instead, he focused on Lily. She was 7 years old now, a curious little girl who loved drawing pictures of rockets and astronauts and taping them to the refrigerator. Every evening, she would sit at the small kitchen table doing homework while Marcus prepared dinner and told her stories about the city, about helping people, about the importance of kindness. Lily believed every word. To her, Marcus was not just her father. He was her hero. That belief was what kept Marcus moving forward even on the longest nights at Whitmore Tech. His job as a janitor was not glamorous, but it was steady. The building stood nearly 40 stories tall, a glass tower that reflected the skyline like a mirror, and Marcus took pride in keeping it spotless. Most employees barely noticed him as they hurried past in expensive suits and polished shoes, but that never bothered him. He reminded himself that honest work had dignity, no matter what uniform a person wore. On the morning when the officers approached him in the lobby, Marcus had started his shift just like any other day. He arrived shortly before 8 o'clock after dropping Lily at school, pushing his cleaning cart across the polished floor while greeting the security guard at the front desk. Everything felt normal until the officers appeared. Now, standing beneath the high ceiling of the lobby while dozens of eyes watched, Marcus tried to steady his breathing. The taller officer spoke again, his tone professional but firm, explaining that they needed Marcus to answer questions regarding a report filed earlier that morning. Marcus nodded slowly, confusion filling his chest as he glanced once more across the lobby. Claire Whitmore had stepped forward from the elevator, her posture straight, her expression distant. For a brief moment their eyes met, and Marcus searched her face for any sign that she recognized the man who had helped her the night before. Instead, she simply looked at the officers and gave a small, controlled nod, and Marcus realized that whatever had happened between midnight and sunrise had turned a quiet act of kindness into something far more complicated. The quiet tension in the lobby lingered even as the officers gently guided Marcus Reed toward the glass doors that led outside to the waiting patrol car, and for a moment the entire morning seemed to move in slow motion as employees whispered behind computer screens and half-opened office doors. Marcus did not resist, and he did not argue because confusion, not anger, filled his thoughts. As he stepped onto the sidewalk, the cool breeze of the early morning brushed against his face and carried with it the distant sound of traffic moving through downtown streets. Only 12 hours earlier those same streets had been glowing with city lights as Marcus drove Claire Whitmore home after the company celebration. The memory of that night returned clearly now. The party had taken place on the top floor of Whitmore Tech, a wide executive lounge surrounded by tall windows that overlooked the river and the skyline beyond it. From his janitor station, Marcus had watched the celebration quietly while wiping down tables and collecting empty glasses. The company's senior managers had gathered there to celebrate a major contract that had been finalized earlier that week, and the atmosphere had been lively with music, laughter, and conversations about expansion plans that stretched across continents. Marcus kept to his routine, moving from one corner of the room to another with his cart while making sure the space remained clean. Most of the executives did not notice him, but he noticed them because part of his job required him to move through the room carefully without interrupting anyone. Claire Whitmore had arrived later than the others, stepping out of the elevator wearing a dark blue blazer that reflected the soft golden lights above the bar. Even from across the room, Marcus could see the subtle shift in the atmosphere when she appeared. Conversation straightened, shoulders squared, and several senior managers approached her immediately with updates about the new contract. Claire listened with quiet attention and offered brief nods before eventually allowing herself a moment to sit near the edge of the lounge where the windows framed the entire city below. As the evening continued, the celebration grew louder. Several executives toasted the company's success with champagne and expensive whiskey, while the skyline outside slowly turned from deep orange to midnight blue. Marcus noticed that Claire rarely drank at company gatherings, but that night seemed different. Perhaps it had been the pressure of closing such a large deal or the exhaustion from weeks of negotiations. By the time the party began to thin out after 11 o'clock, Claire remained seated alone near the private elevator corridor, her posture noticeably tired. Marcus remembered hesitating when he first saw her there, because he knew the unwritten rule inside buildings like Whitmore Tech. People in his position usually kept their distance from executives unless spoken to directly. But another part of him, the part shaped by years as a firefighter and a father, recognized the situation differently. Claire Whitmore was not the powerful executive everyone feared at that moment. She was simply a person who needed help getting home safely. So Marcus approached carefully and spoke with respectful calm, asking if she needed assistance getting to her car. Claire looked up slowly, her voice quieter than he expected as she agreed. Marcus guided her through the private parking garage where the concrete floor echoed beneath their footsteps. He helped her into the passenger seat of her sedan and drove slowly through the quiet streets toward the riverfront neighborhood listed on her company driver profile. The ride had been silent except for the faint sound of the city passing by the windows. When they arrived, Marcus helped her inside the house, placing her gently on the living room couch, where a soft lamp cast warm light across the room. Before leaving, he placed that small handwritten note on the coffee table and quietly closed the door behind him. Standing now beside the patrol car outside Whitmore Tech, Marcus replayed every detail in his mind because nothing about that night had felt wrong. Yet somewhere between that quiet act of kindness and this morning's accusation, something had changed in a way he could not yet understand. The patrol car moved slowly through the downtown streets while the early morning traffic thickened around them, and Marcus Reed sat quietly in the back seat, trying to keep his thoughts steady as glass towers passed by the window. The officer in the passenger seat occasionally spoke into a small radio, confirming their arrival time at the precinct, but otherwise the ride remained calm and professional. Marcus appreciated that. No one raised their voice and no one treated him like a criminal, yet the situation still felt unreal. Only an hour earlier he had been preparing to begin another routine shift, pushing his cleaning cart across the polished floors of Whitmore Tech. Now he was heading toward a police station because of a report connected to a night he believed had ended with nothing more than a simple act of kindness. When they arrived, the building looked exactly like every city police station Marcus had seen during his years as a firefighter. Brick walls, large glass doors, and a lobby where quiet conversations echoed beneath bright fluorescent lights. The officers guided Marcus inside and directed him to a small interview room furnished with a metal table and 2 chairs. One officer explained that they simply needed to ask several questions to clarify the report that had been filed earlier that morning. Marcus nodded respectfully and took a seat, folding his hands together as he waited. The questions began gently. The officer asked where Marcus had been the previous night, what time he had finished work, and whether he had visited the home of Claire Whitmore. Marcus answered each question honestly, explaining the company celebration, the moment he found Claire alone near the elevator corridor, and his decision to drive her home safely. As he spoke, he described the route he had taken through the parking garage, the quiet drive through the city streets, and the moment he left the note on the coffee table before walking back to the bus stop. The officer listened carefully, occasionally writing details into a notebook while maintaining a calm expression. Marcus could tell they were evaluating every word, trying to determine whether his explanation matched the report that had triggered the investigation. After several minutes, the officer placed the pen down and spoke again, this time with a more serious tone. He explained that earlier that morning Claire Whitmore had reported that sensitive company data stored on her personal laptop had been accessed during the night. According to the timeline she provided, Marcus Reed had been the last person inside her home before the issue was discovered. The officer clarified that no conclusions had been reached yet, and that their goal was simply to verify the sequence of events. Marcus felt a quiet weight settle in his chest as he processed those words. He had not touched her laptop, and he had certainly not accessed any company data. He repeated that clearly and calmly. The officer nodded again, noting the statement while assuring Marcus that the investigation would review additional evidence, including home security recordings and digital access logs. Time passed slowly in the interview room while sunlight climbed higher outside the window of the hallway beyond the door. Marcus sat there thinking about Lily and the promise he had made that morning when he dropped her off at school. He had told her he would be home in time to help with her science project after dinner. The thought of disappointing her hurt more than the confusion surrounding the investigation. Meanwhile, across the city in her riverfront home, Claire Whitmore sat in her office reviewing reports from her technology team. A half-finished cup of coffee rested on the desk beside her laptop, while several security specialists examined system logs displayed across large monitors. Claire remained silent, her mind slowly piecing together fragments of the previous night. She remembered the celebration, the long conversations about contracts, and the exhaustion that followed hours of negotiations. She remembered sitting alone near the elevator corridor and someone speaking to her with quiet respect. But the details between that moment and waking up on her couch felt distant and incomplete, like a memory covered by morning fog. As technicians continued scanning the company network for irregular activity, Claire leaned back in her chair and stared at the small handwritten note that had been found on her coffee table earlier that morning, the one that read in simple ink, "You were safe, Marcus." The hours inside the interview room passed slowly, measured only by the faint ticking of a wall clock somewhere in the hallway and the distant murmur of conversations moving through the police station. Marcus Reed remained seated with quiet patience, his hands resting on the metal table as he replayed the previous night again and again in his mind, searching every memory for something he might have overlooked. Yet every detail remained the same. He had driven Claire Whitmore home, made sure she was safe, and left immediately. Nothing more. Across the table, the officer reviewing the report leaned back slightly in his chair while reading through several pages on a tablet computer. The expression on his face was not hostile, but it carried the focused seriousness of someone responsible for confirming facts rather than assumptions. After a moment, he looked up again and explained that the company's internal security team had discovered that an encrypted project file connected to Whitmore Tech's newest contract had briefly been accessed sometime after midnight. The access attempt had triggered an alert in the company network system because the file contained confidential financial projections that were restricted to only a handful of executives. According to the digital timeline provided to investigators, the access occurred within a time window that overlapped with the period Marcus had been inside Claire Whitmore's house. Marcus listened carefully and repeated what he had already said several times. He had not opened a computer, touched any device, or even entered the office area of the house. He had walked into the living room, helped Claire settle on the couch, placed the note on the coffee table, and left. The officer nodded again and wrote several additional notes before standing to step outside the room for a moment. When the door closed, Marcus finally leaned back in the chair and let out a slow breath. The room felt unusually quiet now. His thoughts drifted to Lily again, imagining her sitting in her classroom across town, carefully coloring the planets on a science worksheet while waiting for the end of the school day. She trusted him completely. That trust mattered more to Marcus than anything else in the world. At the same time, inside the glass conference room of Whitmore Tech headquarters, Claire Whitmore sat with 3 members of her technology security team as lines of data moved across the monitors in front of them. The senior analyst explained that the attempted file access had been detected through the company's encrypted network gateway, but the system logs were incomplete because the connection had originated from a remote wireless signal rather than directly from Claire's laptop. Claire listened without interrupting, her fingers resting lightly against the edge of the conference table while she studied the scrolling information on the screen. The more she looked at the timestamps, the more something about the sequence felt inconsistent with the explanation she had initially assumed. She remembered waking up that morning on the couch with the note beside her, a simple message written in careful handwriting that did not resemble the actions of someone attempting to hide a crime. Claire asked the analyst to rewind the log sequence and enlarge the timestamp column on the screen. As the numbers appeared more clearly, she noticed a detail that made her sit up slightly in her chair. The attempted data connection had occurred nearly 40 minutes after the estimated time Marcus Reed would have left her house based on the security camera positioned at the end of her driveway. The room grew quiet as the analysts noticed the same discrepancy. Meanwhile, back at the police station, the officer returned to the interview room carrying a small folder of additional notes. He placed the folder on the table and looked at Marcus with a more thoughtful expression than before, as if the investigation had just begun to reveal that the situation might not be as simple as it first appeared. The afternoon light outside the police station had shifted slightly, casting long pale shadows across the hallway windows, and Marcus Reed noticed the change only because the quiet interview room had become the center of his entire world for the past several hours. The officer who had stepped out earlier returned carrying a small folder and a paper cup of water, which he placed gently on the metal table in front of Marcus. The gesture was simple but respectful, and Marcus nodded his thanks before taking a slow sip. His mind remained steady, even though uncertainty lingered around him like a fog that refused to clear. Across town, the security conference room inside Whitmore Tech had grown more focused as the technology analysts continued reviewing every digital trace connected to the attempted file access. Large monitors displayed detailed network maps, each line representing connections that had traveled through the company's secure servers during the night. Claire Whitmore sat quietly at the head of the table while the senior analyst explained what they were seeing. The attempted access had not originated directly from her laptop after all. Instead, it appeared to have been routed through a nearby wireless network that briefly connected to the house's internet signal before disappearing again. That detail shifted the entire direction of the investigation. Claire leaned forward slightly, her attention narrowing on the timestamps displayed. Across the monitor, the moment of attempted access occurred nearly 40 minutes after Marcus Reed had left her house. The driveway security camera confirmed that timeline clearly. She watched the playback again as the video screen showed Marcus walking calmly down the driveway after closing the front door behind him, the porch light casting a warm glow across the sidewalk as he headed toward the street to catch the late-night bus. Nothing about his behavior suggested secrecy or panic. He simply walked away. Claire folded her hands together on the conference table and asked the analyst to display a wider scan of nearby wireless signals recorded during the same time window. When the expanded map appeared, several additional signals from neighboring properties appeared on the screen. One of those signals had briefly connected to her home network before disappearing within seconds. The senior analyst explained that it was possible someone within range of the house could have attempted the connection without ever entering the building. The room became quiet as everyone absorbed the implication. Meanwhile, at the police station, the officer opened the folder and sat down across from Marcus again, his posture slightly more relaxed than before. He explained that investigators were continuing to review digital evidence and security footage provided by Whitmore Tech. Marcus listened carefully and answered each new question with the same calm honesty he had maintained since the beginning of the interview. The officer asked about the exact moment Marcus left the house, the route he took afterward, and whether anyone else might have known about Claire Whitmore being home that night. Marcus described the quiet riverfront street, the soft sound of wind moving through the trees near the sidewalk, and the empty bus stop where he waited nearly 15 minutes for the late route that carried him back toward his apartment across the city. His answers remained consistent with everything he had said earlier. As the officer finished writing his notes, he paused for a moment before speaking again, this time with a tone that carried a hint of cautious curiosity rather than suspicion. He explained that the timeline investigators were now reviewing suggested the situation might involve someone else entirely. Marcus felt a small but important shift inside his chest when he heard those words. Not relief exactly, but the first sign that the truth might eventually find its way into the open. At Whitmore Tech, Claire Whitmore continued studying the network map displayed on the screen while the analysts worked beside her, and for the first time since that morning she allowed herself to consider the possibility that the quiet janitor who had helped her the night before might be the only person in the entire situation who had acted with complete honesty. The atmosphere inside Whitmore Tech's security conference room grew heavier as the analysts continued tracing the mysterious wireless signal that had briefly connected to Claire Whitmore's home network during the night. Lines of data moved steadily across the monitors while the senior analyst adjusted filters that narrowed the search to devices active within a 300-yard radius of the riverfront property. Claire watched in silence, her thoughts moving carefully through the fragments of memory returning from the previous night. She remembered Marcus Reed guiding her through the quiet garage with respectful patience. She remembered the calm way he spoke, never once acting as if her position at the company made her more important than anyone else. That detail now stood out sharply in her mind because the situation unfolding on the screen suggested that someone else had taken advantage of the confusion after Marcus left. The analyst finally paused the scrolling data and highlighted a connection log that appeared for only 17 seconds before disappearing. The signal originated from a portable network relay device, something often used by cybersecurity professionals to test vulnerabilities in large corporate systems. Claire felt a slow realization settle in as she studied the device signature displayed on the monitor. Only a small number of people inside Whitmore Tech would even know how to operate equipment like that. Meanwhile, back at the police station, Marcus Reed remained seated across from the officer while the quiet hum of air conditioning filled the room. The officer had stepped outside again to receive an update from the investigative team working with Whitmore Tech's security department. Marcus sat patiently, his eyes drifting toward the window at the far end of the hallway where afternoon sunlight now stretched across the floor. He imagined Lily leaving school soon, probably walking home with her backpack bouncing gently against her shoulders while she thought about the science project they planned to finish together that evening. The thought strengthened his resolve to remain calm. He had done nothing wrong, and the truth would eventually become clear. Across the city, the investigation took an unexpected turn when the analyst expanded the search to include employee devices registered within Whitmore Tech's internal security system. One signal immediately matched the pattern recorded during the attempted access. The device belonged to Daniel Mercer, a senior member of the company's financial strategy team who had attended the celebration the previous night. Daniel Mercer was known throughout the company for his sharp analytical skills and his constant interest in high-level financial projections connected to upcoming contracts. Claire's expression tightened slightly as she watched the analyst pull up the employee profile on the screen. The timeline showed that Daniel Mercer had left the celebration shortly after Claire stepped away from the lounge. Surveillance footage from the building parking garage revealed that his vehicle had driven toward the same riverfront neighborhood where Claire lived. The room grew silent as the implications became clear to everyone present. The analyst explained that if Mercer had parked nearby and used the portable relay device, he could have briefly connected to Claire's home network from outside the property without ever appearing on the house cameras. That connection would have allowed him to attempt access to the encrypted file stored on her laptop through the company's remote synchronization system. Claire slowly stood from her chair and walked closer to the monitor, studying the timestamps again while her thoughts aligned with the emerging evidence. If Mercer had been searching for confidential financial projections connected to the new contract, the attempt could have been motivated by insider trading or unauthorized investment activity. The possibility transformed the situation completely. At that same moment, the officer returned to the interview room at the police station with a new message on his phone. He looked at Marcus Reed with a different expression than before, one that carried the quiet recognition that the man sitting across the table might not have been the suspect in this story after all. The officer stood quietly for a moment after reading the message on his phone, then placed the device slowly on the metal table as he looked across at Marcus Reed with a noticeably different expression than the one he had carried earlier in the day. The tension that had filled the interview room for hours seemed to soften slightly as he cleared his throat and explained that new information had just come in from the investigation team working with Whitmore Tech. Marcus listened carefully, sitting upright in the chair as the officer continued speaking in a calm and measured voice. According to the company's security analysts, the attempted access to the confidential project file had been traced to a portable wireless relay device operating outside Claire Whitmore's home shortly after midnight. The connection had lasted less than 20 seconds before disappearing, but that brief signal had been enough for the system to record the device identification number. That number, the officer explained, had just been matched to equipment registered under the name of Daniel Mercer, a senior financial strategist at Whitmore Tech. Marcus remained silent as he absorbed the words, the meaning slowly settling into place like the final piece of a puzzle that had been scattered across the entire day. Across the city, inside Whitmore Tech headquarters, Claire Whitmore had already reached the same conclusion while standing beside the glowing monitors in the security conference room. The analysts had pulled up surveillance footage from the company garage showing Daniel Mercer leaving the building shortly after the celebration ended. His car had traveled toward the riverfront neighborhood where Claire lived, stopping briefly on a side street, less than 200 yards from her house, before returning to the city. The evidence aligned perfectly with the wireless signal recorded by the network logs. Claire stood with her arms folded as she watched the timeline replay again on the screen, her mind reconstructing the events of the previous night with increasing clarity. Marcus Reed had not been the person attempting to access the file. He had been the one person who acted with quiet integrity, while someone else tried to take advantage of the situation. Back in the police station, the officer continued explaining that investigators were now contacting Whitmore Tech's legal department to review the new evidence and determine the next steps. Marcus finally spoke again, his voice steady but thoughtful as he confirmed once more that he had not entered any room beyond the living area of Claire Whitmore's home and had not touched any computer equipment. The officer nodded, noting that the updated timeline supported Marcus's statement. The attempted connection occurred nearly 40 minutes after Marcus had left the property, which meant he could not have been responsible. The shift in the room was subtle but unmistakable. What had begun as an interrogation was now turning into a clarification of events. Meanwhile, Claire Whitmore had already picked up her phone and contacted the police station directly, informing investigators that the internal security review confirmed Marcus Reed's account of the night. Her voice carried a calm authority as she explained that the janitor who had helped her home had done nothing wrong and should never have been considered a suspect. The officer across from Marcus received the same update seconds later through his radio, and when he looked up again, there was no longer any suspicion in his eyes. Instead, there was something closer to respect for the man who had spent the entire day answering questions with patience and honesty. Outside the station windows, the late afternoon sun was beginning to lower across the skyline, and for the first time since that morning, Marcus Reed felt the quiet certainty that the truth had finally begun to rise to the surface. The late afternoon sky above the city had softened into a warm golden glow by the time Marcus Reed finally stepped out of the police station, and the cool breeze that moved through the street carried a quiet sense of relief that he had been waiting for all day. The officer who had escorted him earlier now stood beside the door and extended a hand in a gesture of respect, explaining once more that the investigation had confirmed Marcus had done nothing wrong. The attempted access to the company's confidential files had been traced to Daniel Mercer's equipment, and Whitmore Tech's legal department was already handling the situation internally. Marcus thanked the officer with calm sincerity before stepping onto the sidewalk where the sounds of the evening city surrounded him again. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking a slow breath as the weight of the long day finally began to lift from his shoulders. His thoughts immediately turned to Lily. School would have ended hours ago, and he imagined her sitting at the small kitchen table in their apartment, crayons spread across the surface while she waited patiently for him to come home and help finish the science project they had planned together. Without hesitation, Marcus walked toward the nearby bus stop and boarded the first route heading across town. The ride carried him past glowing storefronts and rows of brick buildings as the sky gradually shifted from gold to deep blue. Meanwhile, inside Whitmore Tech headquarters, the atmosphere in the executive conference room had grown unusually quiet. Claire Whitmore stood at the window overlooking the skyline, while members of the security team finalized their report confirming the source of the unauthorized connection. The evidence was clear. Daniel Mercer had attempted to retrieve financial projections connected to the company's new contract by using a portable relay device near Claire's house after the celebration ended. The discovery had shocked several members of the leadership team who had trusted Mercer's reputation for years. Claire listened to the final summary before dismissing the analysts with a quiet nod. Once the room emptied, she remained standing by the window, holding the small handwritten note Marcus had left on her coffee table the night before. The message was simple but powerful in its honesty. You were safe, Marcus. The memory of that quiet act of kindness now carried a weight she had not fully understood earlier that morning. Without Marcus's help, she might have remained alone outside the building late at night, vulnerable in ways she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. Instead, he had simply ensured she made it home safely and walked away without asking for recognition or reward. That realization stayed with her long after the investigation ended. Across the city, Marcus finally stepped off the bus and walked the familiar 2 blocks toward the modest apartment building where he and Lily lived. The hallway smelled faintly of dinner from neighboring kitchens as he unlocked the door and stepped inside. Lily looked up instantly from the table where sheets of colored paper and glue sticks were scattered across the surface. Her face brightened the moment she saw him. She ran across the room and wrapped her arms around him with the effortless trust only a child can give. Marcus knelt down and hugged her tightly, feeling the simple warmth of home replace every stressful moment from the day. Together, they returned to the table, and began assembling the small model of the solar system Lily had been building for her class project. Outside the apartment window, the city lights slowly appeared one by one across the skyline. At Whitmore Tech, Claire Whitmore stood alone in her office looking out at those same lights while reflecting on the unexpected lesson the day had revealed. Integrity did not come from titles, wealth, or corner offices. Sometimes it came quietly from the person pushing a janitor cart through a hallway after everyone else had gone home.